talking about Adele. She opened up about her divorce in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, you've heard of her, saying she was embarrassed about not being able to make her marriage work. So we want to get into Adele and Adele's feelings, but we also want to ask you, would you feel like you had failed if your relationship ended in divorce?
Okay, you know what? First of all, I love the special with her yesterday. She's so real. She's so candid. She reminds me a lot of this Jess Allen.
Oh,
but anyway, no, I loved how she was really honest and open about it. And she shared in the interview that she comes from a divorced family. And so it was really interesting to me to hear her say, I feel like I had failed.
Yeah.
Because I remember, like Jennifer Aniston once upon a time had said she never expected much from marriage because she came from a divorced family. Remember that back in the day?
I do remember that.
I was like, well, whatever, because that's a great institution, I think was her quote, very sarcastically. And I come from, you know, my parents have been almost 50 years married. And I always thought that if your marriage failed, if you came from, you know, sort of this quote unquote intact family, that's where the shame and, you know, the oh, I failed would have come from. So I will say I was very surprised by that revelation because it almost feels like she had put it up to this very high esteemed place, which surprised me because she wasn't raised with it, although she shared really interesting things. Like that was what they were always taught was the right family, was the nuclear family. So very interesting that we felt the same way, but coming from two very different backgrounds. Yeah.
You know, I have to say that I appreciated Adele's how she got there because she did say it felt like she was talking with girlfriends and it felt like she said, I was just plodding along. And that is, I think it's harder to stay in a relationship than it is to leave one because it takes a lot of work. And so I love that she said plodding along because I would wager that, not your parents, but sometimes when you hear about people who've been married 40, 50, 60 years, sometimes it worked because they plodded along.
And it was also the cultural expectation.
It's the cultural expectation. So when you don't plod along, and that message for young women to be like, hey, guess what? You know, life doesn't have to be just sort of ho-hum. Instead of plodding along, you can really do something beautiful for yourself. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, I think sometimes that whole embarrassment or feeling of failure in celebrity culture comes when you meet someone, you move in 2 weeks later, you marry them 6 months after that and divorce them 18 months after that. I mean, I think that is cause for embarrassment because that means you're acting like a child. So, you know, but if you have put some time in, I don't think you should feel embarrassed. Denise and I were together for 10 years before we ever got married. We've been together 22 now, but we talk all the time about, does this marriage serve us? And when it fails to serve us, we will uncouple and move on from it if need be. So,
and there'll be no shame or embarrassment with that, right, Candy?
No.
No.
Oh my goodness, no, because what we've had for this amount of time was wonderful. We built the Candy Show together, and we may continue to, if we decide to uncouple, we'd still build the Candy Show together. So I think, you know, you can be grown up about these things, but you don't have to see it as a failure.
But Cyn, can I ask, like,
much more.
The kids?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, like, there's also a child involved in the case with Adele. Does that make a difference?
I mean, I think Candy raises an interesting point about focusing, that we often focus on the failure over, you know, that moment of a break rather than the years and years of success that worked, right? I mean, obviously, it's a different story if there was behind the scenes, it was miserable, right? When it comes to kids, again, I think that in some cases, you'll find that kids are actually happier, perhaps, post-divorce. It really depends on the way the divorce goes down, the way the parents handle the aftermath. I actually, Jason has a nephew who, after his parents got divorced, he kind of candidly said his father remarried and then he ended up with another child. And he said, if I had known that divorce would be so good, I would have told my parents to do it sooner.
Yeah.
So he was really happy because they, you know what? They did it so well, though. They still got along. They presented a united front. But I mean, obviously, there's the other side of that, which is couples who are so acrimonious and they're so miserable, and then they try to stick it out. I mean, that's equally as bad. Anyway, Michelle Marie on Facebook said, the hardest part of my divorce was the internal shame that I had failed. I actually stuck it out longer just to avoid it. The irony, of course, is that I wouldn't dream of judging someone else for getting out of a bad marriage. And I think you raised this, that word shame has come up a lot in this conversation. And it's interesting to think about it because I don't think women wear the same amount of shame that they did back in like my mother's generation, but it sounds like it's still very much there that we feel like failures.
Yeah, no,
even if we've
And
tried
you know
that.
what, sisters? I just want to say to all the women listening, the best thing that ever happened in my life, the best moment for me was the moment I figured out that what other people think of me is absolutely none of my business. And the same is true for you. And the quicker you can get there, the happier your life is going to be. You got one life to lead. Don't waste it thinking about what other people think of you.
I loved that comment you just read, Cynthia, and what you just said as well, Candy, because I love that she said she doesn't do it. She doesn't sort of transfer any feelings of shame to someone else who goes through a divorce, but she was doing it to herself.
Yeah.
Because it's true. Like when we have family members or friends who are going through a split up, there's no shame. There's just sadness that something is ending.
Sure.
That's it. It was a small period of mourning.
I go back to Jennifer Aniston where I started because she had said it would be so sad that you would have any of this kind of decision to stay based on fear. She says it would be such a disservice to the one life you have to live. And I said, oh, I like that. I like that a lot. I do.
I mean, the flip side of that, though, I will say, just to turn it on myself, having been with the same person for 20 years, there have definitely been some rough patches where I haven't been totally sure if we would make it. And if I had given up during those periods of time, I wouldn't have got to the place where we are now, which is like the pandemic somehow brought us closer together than ever. Like we feel like this kind of like, united front. I mean, I really haven't felt closer to Jason in years. And so I guess, it's all so unique and individualized, but I do know that I probably, would I look back with regret? Obviously I would.
Yeah.
Like I would be, but I hope I wouldn't feel shame. But I do think sometimes we have this culture that encourages us to leave at all costs. And sometimes I think Esther Perel, the marital therapist, she's a famous one, has pointed out that the shame used to be for leaving a relationship, and I guess that still exists. But a lot of times now there's some shame if you stay and you stick it out, especially if there's been like,
infidelity and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We talked about that with Beyonce and Jay-Z. Anyway, no one size fits all.